people give Hinchcliffe a hard time. I love him because he's been good to me. Like,
sure,
you know what I mean?
But if you watch that special.
I haven't watched the special. But
I dare you.
You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so I caught this podcast that Jim Norton did with Gianmarco Soresi. Jim Norton is like an OG of comedy radio. He used to do Opie and Anthony back in the day, and then I think that evolved into different radio shows where Jim Norton was like more of a regular character. He started off as kind of like a side host. So that world of comedy and radio was always very shock jockey, always very offensive or controversial. So that's kind of the world that he comes from, but he's also sort of an interesting dude because I guess he's like technically queer or he's married to a trans woman. So he's still definitely like right-leaning or right-wing, but has a little bit of a different perspective than a lot of those guys because of that. And Gianmarco Soresi has been sort of emerging as one of the premier critics of the right-wing comedy scene, at least in comedy. So he's one of the comics who's willing to go out there and, talk shit about them, trash them. And he's not the only one. Plenty of people do. But I think Gianmarco is one of the guys who articulates a pretty solid critique of them. So that's what they talked about here. And they had a pretty reasonable exchange here. So I wanted to get into it. And I know that these are just comedians, especially a guy like Jim Norton. Who cares what these guys think, really? But at the same time, this is a very interesting intersection of two worlds of comedy and two different ways of thinking. And I think also the fact that they had a pretty respectful exchange makes it worth looking at. So here is them talking about specifically Joe Rogan. They talked about Joe Rogan on this podcast for quite a bit and the politics of talking to politicians or talking about important issues in like a comedy podcast format. So here's that. And then they talked a little bit about Tony Hinchcliffe later as well. So here's the first clip where they talk about Rogan.
Who have you wanted on your podcast that you haven't been able to get? Have you had Mom Donnie on?
We don't do politicians.
Oh, you don't?
We don't.
Really?
We don't, because I don't want it to be that. I want to be able to be like, hey, we're bullshitting here. We'll talk about serious things.
Sure.
But I think the moment I talk to a policymaker, I feel an obligation to do a level of research that I don't want to do. And that's not what I want to. That's not what I want to be, at least right now. So I'll like engage in. I'll talk about politics. I'll open for a rally, maybe if it's someone I really love.
Have you done that?
I opened for a Mom Donnie rally.
So I always hate these guys, and then like after a while, you're like I've met so many people that have trashed publicly. I did a book, and my second book, I trashed a lot of people.
Yeah, I was pretty harsh. I was harsh on people who had Trump on the podcast. And I still feel that way. And then I went to, there was a Netflix brunch, and it was like, all right, here's 12 people I've talked shit about.
Have you met, did you talk to any of them?
Schultz and I once talked at the Cellar once, and it was fine. There was no resolution to it. And then like, I don't know, I wouldn't talk to Theo Vaughn, or I wouldn't talk to Joe Rogan. I don't need to.
Would you not talk to them just because of their politics, or have you heard things about them that you like? I don't like this guy.
No, it's not necessarily even wouldn't talk to them, but I mean, like, the truth is, like, I don't respect them, and especially if I don't respect their stand-up comedy, then I go, well, what do I even care? I certainly don't respect you as a piercing journalist. So if I don't even like your stand-up, then whatever.
Yeah,
you're not a peer.
Stand-up is a taste thing. So anyone who doesn't like stand-up, but do you not
taste the thing? But I respect. I can respect someone who I hate if they're a great comic. I believe in the integrity of my comedic taste.
But do you not respect Rogan and Theo, at least for like Theo gave a funny Trump interview. Like he gave the most different Trump interview that anyone has done, and he was totally himself. In the interview.
That's fine. He's a good interviewer. He's an entertaining personality. I just don't think Trump's a good force to America. I think it's hurt culture. I think it's hurt people. I think it hurts queer people. It's people get mistreated, and so I just don't like the cozying up. I think we've become way too cozy with politicians if we want to maintain that badge of being a comedian. I think politicians should be like, I don't know if I want to do the comedy podcast. And I think it's become a little too much like, you got to get on Rogan. You should be scared to go on a comedian's podcast if you're a politician or a pope.
Obama broke that mold.
I agree. And I had a friend, I remember when he did Between
Zach,
Two Ferns, and my friend was like, I don't really like this. And I remember being like, shut up.
It was funny.
Shut up.
It was funny. Zach
was funny.
Really funny when he did it.
Again, it's not Joe Rogan's fault to a certain degree. It's like, well, if people aren't educated, are you going to be mad at Joe Rogan for saying something crazy and everyone believes it? Like, it's like if someone says, I got your nose, and everyone believes it, and then we shoot the guy who made the joke.
But that's true. But I also don't think you have to be uneducated to like him. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that it's
You
only...
can like it as entertainment. I just think if you're going like for medical advice, those people who do,
Right.
that's crazy.
I wouldn't go to
me.
any podcaster for medical advice, but Bill Gates gives a lot of advice about health and COVID vaccine. And I'm not against COVID,
Sure.
but I'm saying, like, is he more qualified to talk about it than Joe, who's in good shape? Like, you know, look at Bill Gates. He's just a fucking... You know what I mean? Like, who are we listening to?
Yeah, but we should have some qualifications. But when is this entertainment? Because now it feels like we're talking about news. Now it feels like we're just talking about news. And then I go back to like, okay, well, news should have higher standards than entertainment.
But that obviously is entertainment because people are listening to it. Like, there really is something to be said that when millions of people are going to something and listening to it, there is an entertaining factor to it. If all of a sudden people are like, wow, that's a guy who I like what he says. I like listening to this guy talk, and I've found enough inconsistency in the way the media reports things to not trust them anymore. Maybe people trust him more because he's willing to have people on he doesn't like.
Part of this is not necessarily that I think what they're doing is inherently wrong. You can talk about whatever shit you want. It's just so many people listen that I think it changes the context of what you're doing. It's the same like Spider-Man quote of great power, great responsibility. It's just like, if you do look out one day and a bunch of people are taking your advice, I'm going to go, well, I'm going to be a lot more careful when I give something as serious as what vaccinations your child should take.
But there are, yes, of course, but there are people who would listen to this and say, yeah, but look at all of the people that are coming to the conclusion you're saying, but on the opposite side of it, that are going, this guy's saying exactly what I think is right, and this guy is giving exactly the... I don't even want to say advice.
I just want to encourage people not to go to this for that advice. That's all. The same way I wouldn't want them to go to a priest for advice on to deal with their alcoholism if the priest is going to talk about, you know, spirits and devil and don't masturbate. Like, I just think it's again, I don't really care about the person. It's more about look at society. Why are you going to this for this? If my dad was getting a heart surgery and said he was listening to Joe Rogan about what to prep for the surgery, I go, please, Father, please.
Podcasters are all individual kind of solo contractors. None of them are institutions.
Of course, but that's why I think when they had Trump on, I said, come on, you're not going to ask a question about the poem to Epstein. You're not going to ask any. You're not going to ruffle some feathers here. There's so many things to ask Trump about. If you're an independent contractor, I'm going to hold you to your own standards. I can't. There's not even like an owner to blame. I can look at you in the eye and go, what the fuck? Come on.
Possibly, but also don't forget when Carson would have politicians on, and he would always just have a fun conversation with them. And Carson was bigger than any podcaster is today.
Sure.
And he had many of them on. He had Reagan on when he was governor. I don't think he had a sitting president. But look at Arsenio had Bill Clinton on when he was running. He played
the sax.
Like, so entertainers have always... I'm not saying I'm against hard questions, but I also don't think that a podcaster's job is to ask the questions that a news like people hate Nick Shirley when he's literally doing something that the news should be doing.
All right, so some interesting things said here, and I mean, Norton dropped some like pretty nuclear bad takes in this interview. He also references again that he voted for Cuomo over Mamdani, which apparently they talked about in their original interview on Gianmarco's podcast, which I never saw. He says that he's a fan of Barry Weiss because Barry Weiss hates the New York Times, and so that means he likes Barry Weiss. He also says he doesn't know very much about her, and he says this thing about at the end here about how he likes Nick Shirley. He gets a kick out of him, and he feels like Nick Shirley is doing what the media is supposed to be doing. So that, to me, puts a nice little bow on what he's saying about Rogan. And, you know, they have this exchange that I think is pretty reflective of how a lot of people think about this. Gianmarco is articulating the criticism that a lot of people have about Joe Rogan, certainly from the more inside the comedy world type of perspective, where, you know, you look at these guys who are supposed to be comics, who are not doing a very good job of actually doing comedy, but are doing these political podcasts and whatnot and having a huge impact doing it. And so the sort of flaws, not just in their motivation to do that, but also like, why are they being taken so seriously? A lot of people relate to that. And then you have this perspective of Jim Norton, where he's just saying like, yeah, look, you know, Rogan says things I disagree with, but it's because the media's credibility has been so hurt that people take Rogan seriously. And Norton essentially says that I support anything that kind of breaks up the media's credibility in that way. So I think that nicely summarizes why Rogan has some like permanence at this moment, not just the fact that he speaks to certain biases that people have or is willing to really traffic in a lot of reactionary propaganda on his podcast, but it's the fact that he's constantly pointing at the fact that media can't be trusted and kind of, you know, presenting himself as an alternative. So whether or not it's right, and I agree with almost nothing that Jim Norton said here. A couple okay points that he makes, but there's a lot of people out there who feel like this. And while Jim Norton is a pretty right-leaning guy, and that's clear from some of the other comments he made here, I do think there's a lot of just normal people out there, normies, who listen to Joe Rogan and kind of feel the same thing. And that's really what's particularly insidious about him, is that through the guise of this sort of like regular everyman, I'm just the guy who's questioning the media narratives, he has trafficked in a lot of completely unabashed right-wing propaganda. And there's a lot of people out there who just don't see it that way. They just haven't perceived that. So I'll get back to that in a minute, because I think that ties in with the sort of current socialist trend that we are seeing on the left, the Overton window moving a little bit in that direction. But as far as the media expertise sort of thing goes, right, like the authority and whatnot, I think that what he says about Shirley here is also applicable to Joe Rogan in what makes this a flawed statement, because he says Nick Shirley's doing what the media should be doing. And the problem with that is that what Nick Shirley is doing is much less accurate and therefore much less useful than anything that any serious news organization would do. And even like CBS and the Free Press under Barry Weiss have tried to do similar types of coverage to Nick Shirley because they recognize it's popular, there's a demand for it, and probably because they feel a similar sentiment, right? This is what the news should be doing. And yet when they do it, it's less powerful, because when a serious news organization, even one that's been somewhat corrupted by someone like Barry Weiss, not that it wasn't before, in an attempt to do that same type of coverage, they're going to have to go through a more rigorous process of checking what they put out there, which means that they're going to come up with less at the end of putting a product like that together. It's not going to be as exciting or as entertaining as what Nick Shirley does. And that's because Nick Shirley is a content creator and is held to less of a standard in terms of how true what he puts out there is. And we know that Nick Shirley has been sort of floated to a certain extent by the administration and the right-wing media economy. They kind of purposely boosted him till that video about Minnesota got like millions of views after Elon Musk posted it. And there's some reporting now that was a very purposeful effort behind the scenes by the administration. They identified him as somebody who's useful to them. And so the same thing applies with Rogan, where it's like, is he viewed as an alternative to the media, to the news? Yes, he is. And trying to underplay it as like, well, it's just entertainment and it's not really something to be taken that seriously. Jim Norton is kind of simultaneously making both of these arguments. He's saying, well, Joe Rogan's a comedian, so I don't take him as seriously as I would take the news, but the reason he's become so popular in that way is because he's doing the work that the media is not doing, covering stories that people are interested in. But it's true that Rogan doesn't have to say anything that's true. He can just lie for 3 hours straight or say all kinds of falsehoods in his podcast, which he does, and it doesn't go through any type of filtering process. So there's this mentality that Norton is saying here, where it's like, look, if you believe that, and if you take that too seriously, and you, for example, listen to Joe Rogan for medical advice and don't talk to a doctor as well, that's your own fault. That's your problem for taking this too seriously. And while I think that that's certainly an abdication of Joe Rogan, it's letting him off the hook quite clearly, because he does have a responsibility when reaching such a large audience. I mean, that's just kind of obvious. But Rogan says this all the time, right? I'm just having conversations, we're just chatting, that's all this is. But that's not all it is. It's getting beamed out to millions of people, and it is affecting the way people think. And Rogan does say things with a lot of certainty and confidence because he feels like he's seen enough to believe that it's true. But what Norton's articulating here is that, like, Rogan should be able to sell the poison, right? Like, it's just this idea that you should be able to sell poison, and if somebody buys it and drinks it, that's their own fault. Now, when it comes to speech, it's a little different. We obviously have very specific protections for speech, so fair enough. But the criticism of Rogan is ultimately that what he's doing amounts to selling a certain amount of poison. Certainly, when it's like anti-vax Drek, that not only has been very influential, but certainly has brought him to the conclusion that vaccines in general are problematic, unsafe, something that he regularly advocates against. And so, should he have his free speech? Absolutely. But does what he's doing amount essentially to selling poison? Yes, it does, just purely because of the volume and the level of influence that he has. And so I think an important conversation to have here, and Gianmarco's trying to bring it back to this, is like, why are we so lopsided that we're taking people like Joe Rogan seriously, and how can we kind of address that? And that's not going to be addressed by just being like, look, Joe Rogan's popular because he's saying what the people want to hear. There has to be an understanding that just because people want to hear something, or just because people respond to a certain type of content, doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's good for people, and honestly doesn't mean it shouldn't be marginalized. I think that the right place for Rogan to exist in the media ecosystem is to be present, talking about some of these fringe narratives, and to be fairly marginalized to the fringe. I mean, Joe Rogan is, at this point, certainly the definition of a voice that should be marginalized. And this presents a problem because, you know, the reactionary backlash that we're seeing in this era is in large part to the idea that any institutions ever decided that any perspective should be marginalized. But the thing about Rogan that makes him different from even the most biased news reporter is that Rogan specifically feels like his objective is to prop up more right-wing propaganda. Guys like him, Elon Musk is another example, they just feel like right-wing ideas are not well represented enough in media, and so their main priority is to represent those ideas. That's why Rogan, among the other kooks that he has on his show, mostly talks to right-wingers, because he very explicitly feels like left-wing perspectives are overrepresented and right-wing perspectives are underrepresented. So before I wrap that thought up, let me just play this last clip where they talk a little bit about Tony Hinchcliffe. Hinchcliffe comes up at the end here because Gianmarco, instead of asking him about who he hates, Gianmarco asks him, who do you like? Who do you love? And he decides to mention Tony Hinchcliffe. So his thoughts on the matter, once again, just bad takes all around from Jim Norton here, but also some interesting comments from Gianmarco about Hinchcliffe. So here's that.
You know, people give Hinchcliffe a hard time. I love him because he's been good to me. Like,
Sure.
you know what I mean?
But if you watch that special,
I haven't watched the special, but
I dare you.
But I've done, you know what?
I dare you.
I've done Kill Tony enough times where I watch his brain. He's fucking as fast as anybody.
Jim, I can't. Jim,
I'm telling you, when you watch him on Kill Tony, he's lightning
Jim,
fast.
I watched the whole special. You watched the whole special.
No. I'm talking about Kill Tony. I didn't watch the special.
I know.
Okay.
I know. Jim, you can't just like everybody.
But I don't
buy it.
I don't like everybody.
You have too good of taste.
I like Tony very much. I love Joe. They've been friends for Joe's been a friend for 30 years.
Yeah, I don't need you to vibe with your friends. I'm just saying, like, there's things you like and you don't like.
Yeah, but who don't I like? The two people I don't like are for not necessarily performance reasons. And it's really the only reason I'm not mentioning the guy who is because somebody broke his confidence by telling me what he was saying.
I get that. No, I get that. I'm more just like, who do you really respect? I mean, I get your peer. You have a great class.
And I all the podcasters I know, and they've all been pretty good to me. I mean, I kind of judge people how they treat me.
Yeah.
But I'm defending Tony because people go after him a lot. And I'm telling you, when you watch Kill Tony, the podcast, I've sat next to him multiple times, and he's extraordinarily fast.
I'll believe you.
Yeah, he just gets a hard time. I have not seen the special. I know people have been shitting on it, but I have not seen it.
Yeah.
So to be fair to Jim Norton, he did say earlier in this conversation that he doesn't really watch anybody's stand-up specials or anything like that. He doesn't tend to watch stand-up comedy. So he's essentially just complimenting Hinchcliffe for the way that he hosts Kill Tony, which I would say is what Hinchcliffe has carved out a niche for himself as being good at. People say he's so great at roasting. He's one of the all-time great roasters. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think he's good at writing those type of jokes. I don't think he's good at delivering them. He might get one off every now and then, but I do think that the format of Kill Tony is something that he deserves credit for creating. It's an interesting show. But that's where his ability to be quick as a comic does come through, because frankly, he doesn't have to keep the attention on him the whole time, and he can depend on either the talent or the lack of talent of the contestants that come on the show. But then when he does a special on his own, it becomes clear not only is he sort of lacking talent, he has a certain arrogance that really oozes off of him nowadays, but also he seems out of practice. He seems like he's been arrogant enough that he's not really practicing that material, or he's only practicing it in this bubble of people who want to hear right-wing and racist jokes. And so he's been getting away with a lot of really terrible material that did not come across as well in the special as it does on the stages that he's been on. So this is, I think, the edge of these guys' ability to excuse their, reactionary right-wing impulse. It's like, if you're going to bring that stuff to the table, it's got to be good. You got to be good at doing it. And Hinchcliffe is dropping the ball on that. Rogan has dropped the ball on that on his last special as well. I think that's the critique of the mothership scene, is that these guys are not coming with good material because they're too comfortable in this bubble that they've created. And I think that it is inevitable that they will be understood that way, looking back. And I think, though, what's not going to change is the fact that the Overton window has been kind of split open in both directions. And for a while, it was mostly split open to the right, where you had a lot of representation of mainstream liberal views, but the right wing and the racist stuff was able to kind of see a resurgence, a renaissance of sorts. So now you're seeing that on the left, where the socialists are becoming a more prominent part of the conversation and starting to be more dominant in the conversation. And so a lot of these even-handed and reasonable, I just like to pick and choose from both sides and I listen to everybody, they're going to get increasingly hysterical about the increasing embrace of socialism and politics. And they're never going to understand it, but it is very important to understand that the reason socialism is starting to appeal to people more, it kind of ties back in with what Norton was saying about Rogan, how he should have the ability to sell the poison and it's people's responsibility to not buy it. Because more and more that is becoming the logic of our entire society, is that, yeah, these people should be allowed to sell their fucked up products, whether it be meta glasses or AI data centers or whatever. They should be able to sell the poison, and the government has no role in trying to regulate that. So again, with speech, it's a little different than other things, but it is a good metaphor for the fact that this type of wanton abuse of the public goodwill that Joe Rogan and others have enjoyed is going to lead to a backlash of a more rigid view of how society should handle people who are spreading misinformation and anti-science, things that actually hurt people and hurt the community. So again, I mean, a lot of these guys, including Joe Rogan, feel pretty lax right now because their right-wing champions are in power. But as their grip on power starts to slip because of their inability to deliver for the working class, socialists are going to be the ones who take up that space, and it's going to become increasingly acceptable to be a socialist, to talk about socialism. And again, I mean, these guys are going to cry about that the entire time. And so, what I'm saying is that this is what these guys are asking for. They are pushing and pushing to the right while claiming that what they're doing is just, middle ground centrism. And what they're going to get is a serious backlash to the left. And while I think it's good for those leftists to be able to thrive in an open and free media environment, it is also going to lead to a reckoning in this idea of how do we deal with public policy towards people spreading misinformation and reveling in this reactionary hatred. So just be prepared for that. That is the backlash to the fact that right-wing propaganda coming from people like Joe Rogan and Nick Shirley has become so normalized.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic. Can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it.